In this video, you will discover how a single moment of kindness at an airport reshapes not just one life but many. You'll learn why choosing compassion over hurry can change your destiny in ways you never see coming.
Sometimes two people rush through the same airport thinking they're late for a flight, when really they're right on time for something much bigger. That's exactly where Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock found themselves, on a cold, glass-bright morning in Los Angeles, surrounded by strangers who had no idea how much weight both of them were carrying in silence. Keanu moves through Terminal 4 with his head slightly bowed, hands deep in the pockets of a faded black jacket, the kind that makes him disappear into any crowd. A backpack hangs from one shoulder, heavier than it looks, stuffed with scripts he hasn't been able to bring himself to read properly. His assistant walks half a step behind him, checking the time every few seconds, whispering updates about the schedule. Flight to New York at 9:10 a.m., table read at 5 p.m., late night show tomorrow, charity event the day after. It all sounds so organized when she says it. Inside, though, he feels the same quiet ache he's been waking up with for months now. A mix of loneliness, exhaustion, and the strange guilt of having everything and still feeling like something essential is missing. He thinks about turning around for a second, just walking out of the terminal, disappearing into the city. But the automatic doors have already closed behind him, and people are pressing forward. At the same time, a few terminals away, Sandra Bullock is walking fast enough to almost be running, her rolling suitcase rattling over the tile like an anxious drumbeat. She has sunglasses on even though they're indoors, not because she wants to hide from people, but because she needs somewhere for her eyes to go when her brain won't stop spinning. On her phone, a muted call from her agent flashes across the screen. "We really need this meeting, Sandy. They're nervous. You're nervous. Let's just fix this." Another message sits unread from a family member, a simple, "Call me when you land. It's important." That word, important, sits in her chest like a stone. She's always been good at juggling everything, at making chaos look like comedy, but lately she's been asking herself in the quiet moments, how much more can I keep in the air before something drops? She tightens her grip on the suitcase handle and walks faster. Missing this flight isn't an option, not if she wants to save the project, not if she wants to prove to herself she still knows who she is in all of this. Keanu reaches the security line and stops short. It's longer than he expected, a winding snake of carry-ons and tired faces. His assistant exhales sharply, the sound of someone already imagining the emails they'll have to send if he misses the plane. "We should be fine," she says, but her voice doesn't believe it. Ahead of them, an older airport worker in a blue vest is struggling to balance a heavy box on a cart. The box tips, then falls, spilling smaller packages across the floor. People shift away, annoyed but pretending not to see. Keanu watches for a moment, feels the pull of the ticking clock, and then steps out of the line without a word. He crouches next to the man, starts gathering up the boxes one by one. "I've got it," the worker mutters, embarrassed. "I know," Keanu answers softly, "but you don't have to." His assistant checks the boarding time again and swallows her frustration. This is who he is, this is why people love him, it's also why he's late. As he lifts the last box back onto the cart, the loudspeaker above them crackles. "Final boarding call for Flight 207 to New York. Passengers, please proceed to Gate 46B immediately." He feels the words like a hand on his back, pushing him forward. Sandra reaches her security checkpoint just as a young mother in front of her begins to panic. The woman's toddler is screaming, red-faced and inconsolable, while a TSA agent explains for the third time that she needs to take her laptop out of the bag. People behind them start shifting, sighing loudly, checking their watches in exaggerated motions designed to sting. Sandra could easily step into the priority lane to the right. A staff member is even motioning her over, recognizing her, offering her the faster path. For a heartbeat, she considers it. She's got a lot riding on today. Then she sees the mother's hands shaking as she tries to unzip the diaper bag, and something in Sandra's chest won't let her move. She steps out of the line and kneels in front of the little boy, her voice suddenly gentle and playful. "Hey, buddy, that's a pretty serious scream." "You practicing for a movie?" The child hiccups mid-cry, surprised, eyes wet and wide. She makes a silly face, then another, and slowly the crying starts to break into confused little laughs. Together with the TSA agent, she helps the mom unload the bag, place the laptop in the tray. "You're okay," Sandra murmurs to the woman, quietly enough that only she can hear. "You're doing great. These places make everyone feel like they're doing it wrong." As the woman nods, eyes shining, Sandra hears it too, the same announcement echoing across the terminal. "Final boarding call for Flight 207 to New York." She straightens up, her heart kicking against her ribs. The priority lane is closed now. She's going to have to run. By the time Keanu clears security, he's almost jogging, long strides eating up the polished floor. His assistant is half running to keep up, phone pressed to her ear, telling someone on the other end, "We're on our way. Just tell them he's coming, okay?" Overhead, the airport's giant windows throw pale light over everything, turning the crowds into moving shadows. He passes coffee stands, news kiosks, people slumped in chairs scrolling through their phones. He walked through hundreds of terminals in his life, but for some reason, today every face looks a little sharper, every sound a little louder. As he nears gate 46B, he notices a cluster of people standing oddly still, like a stone in the river of motion. His steps slow a little. You can feel it when something is wrong, even before you understand what it is. Sandra is coming from the opposite direction, chest burning from the sprint, one hand gripping the handle of her suitcase, the other still wrapped around her phone. Her agent's voice is in her ear. "If they sense hesitation, they'll pull the plug. Just get on that plane, Sandy." But the words are starting to blur because ahead she sees it too, the same silent circle of bodies gathered near the gate door, blocking the path. There's an energy in the air that makes her blood run cold. It's not just impatience. It's fear, confusion, compassion fighting with inconvenience. She slows, then stops, scanning the center of the circle. On the floor, an elderly man in a gray coat is lying motionless, one arm crooked at an unnatural angle, his carry-on tipped over beside him. A few people are trying to help, but there's a hesitation, a distance, as if everyone is waiting for someone else to step fully into the moment. Over the intercom, a flight attendant's voice wavers. "Boarding for Flight 207 is temporarily on hold. Please stand by." Both of them move at the same time. Keanu steps out of the crowd on one side, dropping his backpack without thinking, eyebrows drawn together in quiet concern. Sandra sets her suitcase down on the other, sliding between two frozen onlookers, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair now, eyes clear and focused. Neither of them is thinking about their careers in this second, or their schedules, or the plane that might be closing its doors just a few meters away. All they see is a stranger who might not have time left to wait for an ambulance. As they kneel on opposite sides of the fallen man and their eyes lift, finally meeting over his still body, there's a sharp, stunned flicker of recognition, years of shared history crashing into one fragile, breathless instant. The terminal noise seems to fall away for a heartbeat. Whatever unfinished questions they once left hanging between them will have to wait, because right now there is only this man, this moment, and the decision they are about to make together. And as the gate agent glances nervously between the closing departure time on her screen and the scene unfolding on the floor, her hand hovering over the microphone, the entire future of that flight, and of the two people now leaning over a stranger, hangs in the air, suspended in a silence that feels like the edge of something that cannot be undone. The old man's eyelids fluttered as Keanu pressed two fingers gently against his neck, searching for a pulse that felt too faint, too far away. His skin was cool, paper-thin, and his breath came in shallow, ragged pulls. Sandra slipped off her sunglasses completely now, dropping them beside her suitcase, her eyes sharp with a focus that cut through the fog of panic hanging over the gate. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice steady but low, as if anything louder might push him further away instead of pulling him back. For a second there was nothing, just the hum of the terminal and the distant rumble of engines outside. Then the man's fingers twitched. His lips moved without sound, forming shapes that didn't quite turn into words. Keanu leaned closer, the smell of cheap cologne and metal and something like fear hanging in the air. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "We're right here. Just stay with us, okay?" Around them, people stood in a wide half-circle, cell phones raised halfway and then lowered again, a strange mix of curiosity and discomfort holding them in place. A gate agent knelt to their side, her navy blazer pulled tight, trying to keep her professional calm while her eyes betrayed the same worry everyone felt. "Paramedics are on their way," she said, mostly to Sandra, as if looking for permission to stay composed. "They said 3 to 5 minutes." 3 to 5 minutes sounded short and endless at the same time. Sandra nodded, already slipping out of her jacket and folding it into a makeshift pillow for the man's head. "What's his name?" she asked. No one knew. His boarding pass lay crumpled on the floor a few inches away. Keanu grabbed it with one hand, smoothing it open with his thumb. "Arthur," he read softly. "Arthur Hayes, New York." Sandra repeated the name under her breath as if anchoring him to it. "Arthur, okay. Arthur, can you open your eyes for me?" For a brief moment, Arthur did. His gaze was cloudy, unfocused, but not empty. It drifted between them, catching on Keanu's face, then Sandra's, confusion cutting through the fog. He opened his mouth, and this time sound came out, thin and broken. "Gate," he whispered. "My gate, I can't be late." The words hit something deep in Keanu's chest. Late. The word dug into all the times he hadn't been there when someone needed him, when life shifted without waiting for him to catch up. He swallowed hard, pushing those memories back. "Don't worry about the flight," he murmured. "You're not missing anything that matters more than this." Over the loudspeaker above them, the announcement cut through the moment with cruel timing. "Attention, passengers, this is the final boarding call for Flight 207 to New York. Final boarding call for Flight 207. All remaining passengers must proceed to Gate 46B immediately." The words slid like a knife through the circle of onlookers. Keanu's assistant, standing behind him, flinched visibly and checked her watch. Sandra's phone buzzed in her hand, her agent again, the screen lighting up with a string of desperate messages. "Where are you? Boarding now, you cannot miss this." She stared at the notifications for a heartbeat, then locked the screen and slipped the phone into her bag without answering. Her choice felt small and enormous all at once. "Mr. Reeves." The gate agent's voice was quieter now, almost apologetic. "Ms. Bullock, they're holding the plane, but only for another minute. If you want to make this flight, you need to board now." Her eyes flicked to Arthur and back. She wasn't telling them to abandon him, but the math was there, written in the thin line of her mouth. Careers, commitments, millions of dollars waiting on the other side of that jet bridge. Sandra looked at Keanu across Arthur's body, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the sprint through security anymore. The unspoken question hung between them. How much of themselves were they willing to trade today? Keanu could feel his assistant's hand hovering near his shoulder, as if she wanted to physically pull him up but didn't dare. He thought about the table read, the investors, the headlines that would quietly turn on him if he gained a reputation for not showing up when he said he would. He also thought about a small hospital room years ago where he'd arrived just hours too late. That helplessness had never really left him. Looking down at Arthur's lined face, he felt something inside him harden into a clear, simple truth. If he stood up now and walked away, he would carry that choice for the rest of his life. "Go ahead without me," he said softly, without looking back. "Book me on the next flight you can. This is where I need to be." Sandra exhaled, almost laughing in disbelief at how quickly his decision steadied her own. It was like someone had said out loud what her gut had been screaming under the noise of obligations and expectations. She heard her agent's voice in her head. "They are nervous, Sandy. You can't give them a reason to doubt you." And for the first time in a long time, she let herself doubt them instead. Doubt the idea that her worth was measured only in perfect attendance and box office numbers. "Tell them I'm delayed," she said briskly into her phone, finally answering. "Medical emergency. Rebook me on whatever you can, and if they have a problem, they can call me themselves." Then she hung up before he could reply, feeling strangely lighter. Arthur's hand twitched again, fingers curling weakly toward Keanu's. Keanu took it, wrapping his larger hand around the fragile bones with surprising gentleness. "Stay," Arthur rasped, eyes slipping closed again. It was barely a word, more air than sound, but both of them heard it. Sandra moved closer, placing her hand over Arthur's other arm, adding her warmth to Keanu's. "We're staying," she whispered. "You're not going through this alone, Arthur, not today." For a second, his breathing seemed to settle, as if the promise itself had weight, anchoring him to the here and now. Distant wail of a siren grew louder, then cut off sharply as paramedics rushed through the terminal, a red medical bag bumping at one man's knee. The crowd parted, finally snapping out of its stunned stillness. One of the medics dropped to his knees beside them, immediately checking Arthur's vitals, his movements quick and practiced. "What happened?" he asked. "He went down about 3-4 minutes ago," Sandra answered. "He was conscious for a bit, complaining about missing his flight. Pulse felt weak." Her voice was calm, but her fingers were still pressed firmly against Arthur's sleeve, as if letting go might erase him. As the paramedics worked, fitting an oxygen mask over Arthur's face and sliding monitors under his shirt, the gate agent stood, her earpiece crackling. She hesitated, then spoke into her mic with a tight jaw. "They're not coming. Close the door." The words landed like a quiet verdict. A moment later, from the tunnel of the jet bridge, there was a hollow metallic thud as the aircraft door sealed. Through the wide windows, the plane's nose tugged away from the gate, the giant machine beginning its slow, deliberate pushback. Keanu's assistant watched it go, shoulders sagging as she mentally reshuffled the day, the week, his carefully planned calendar. Sandra glanced toward the glass, then back at Arthur, then at Keanu. For a fleeting second, she felt the weight of everything they'd just given up pressed down on her chest. But underneath that weight was something fierce and steady, a sense that, for once, the sacrifice made absolute sense. "They're taking him to St. Mary S.," one paramedic said, already lifting the stretcher. "You two family?" The question hung in the air, awkward and oddly intimate. Keanu looked at Sandra, then at Arthur, and answered without hesitation. "Today we are," he said. The paramedics began to wheel Arthur toward the exit, moving fast. Sandra grabbed the handle of her suitcase, then let it drop again, torn between following and standing there long enough to process what had just shifted inside her. At that exact second, a piercing chime echoed from the gate agent's computer, loud enough to make everyone nearby flinch. Her eyes flew to the screen, her face draining of color as new text flashed across it. A sudden advisory about Flight 207, mid-taxi on the runway. She lifted a hand to her mouth, the beginnings of a horrified, "Oh my God," slipping out, just as Keanu and Sandra turned toward her, their bodies still half facing the departing stretcher, caught between the choice they made and the consequences they hadn't even begun to understand. The gate agent's fingers trembled over the keyboard as the alert kept flashing, a harsh red box against the calm blue of the screen. She clicked into the message, eyes scanning rapidly. Keanu and Sandra watched her face change before they heard any words, professional mask slipping into stark human fear. The crowd quieted in a slow wave, like sound being turned down on an invisible dial. Somewhere down the terminal, a child laughed unaware, the sound thin and wrong in the stillness that settled around Gate 46B. "The plane," the agent started, then stopped, swallowing hard. She pressed two fingers to her earpiece and listened, nodding at something only she could hear. "Flight 207 aborted takeoff on the runway," she said at last, voice unsteady. "There was some kind of engine failure and smoke in the cabin. They're going back to the gate. Emergency crews are meeting them." A hush followed, broken only by a few gasps and the scratch of someone nervously shifting their carry-on. It wasn't a crash. They weren't watching a tragedy play out in real time. But they all knew, in a way that didn't need explaining, that it could have gone very differently. Sandra's hand went automatically to her chest, fingers pressing against the fabric like she needed to feel her own heartbeat to believe it was still there. She looked out at the runway, at the tiny white plane slowly turning back, fire trucks and emergency vehicles racing to meet it like a swarm of red and yellow ants. "We would have been on that plane," she murmured, barely above a whisper. The statement wasn't dramatic or self-pitying. It was simple, stunned fact. Keanu followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. He wasn't thinking about what the tabloids would say or how his team would spin this later. All he felt was a deep, low gratitude that didn't know where to land. Grateful for Arthur collapsing when he did, for the impulse that made them stop, for every small delay that had suddenly turned into something that felt like grace. Behind them, the paramedics continued toward the exit with Arthur's stretcher, unaware of the news that had just rippled through the gate. One of them called over his shoulder, "We're heading to St. Mary's. If you want to follow, now's the time." The decision came without discussion. Keanu grabbed his backpack. Sandra took hold of her suitcase handle. Their flights, their meetings, the angry messages waiting on their phones, those could all be rearranged. A man's life, and whatever strange second chance they had just been handed, could not. They moved quickly toward the sliding doors, side by side but silent, each of them walking under the weight of a new understanding. The line between an ordinary morning and a life-changing one was so thin it was almost invisible until you stepped over it. Outside, the sharp, cool air smelled of exhaust and distant rain. The paramedics slid Arthur into the back of the ambulance, the doors still open. One of them looked at Keanu and Sandra with a flicker of recognition, then set it aside in favor of something more urgent. "You can ride with us if you want," he said. "Not usually protocol, but I think he'd rest easier knowing you're close." Keanu met Sandra's eyes, the reflection of flashing lights dancing across both of their faces. Neither of them said yes, out loud, but a moment later they were climbing into the narrow space beside Arthur, the ambulance doors slamming shut behind them as sirens rose and the airport began to shrink in the rear window. Along with the future they thought they'd been running toward just an hour ago. The ambulance jolted forward, the world outside smearing into streaks of concrete and color. Inside, everything became small and focused. The steady beep of a monitor, the hiss of oxygen, the faint rattle of metal hooks against the walls. Arthur lay strapped to the stretcher, face pale, mask fogging with each shallow breath. A paramedic adjusted the IV line and glanced briefly at the two actors sitting shoulder to shoulder on the narrow bench. "Looks like a cardiac event," he said, not unkindly. "Could be mild, could be worse. We're doing what we can. Him having people with him, that actually helps more than you'd think." Sandra watched Arthur's chest rise and fall, the flimsy hospital blanket barely moving. Her own heart was hammering, but her voice was soft when she spoke. "Arthur," she said, leaning closer. "You scared the hell out of everyone back there, you know that?" His eyes stayed closed, but his fingers curled again like they were trying to grip reality. "You're on your way to the hospital now, you're getting help, and we're right here, okay? You didn't ruin anyone's day, you just changed it." The last words caught in her throat, because as she said them, she realized how deeply true they already were for him and for her. Keanu stared down at his own hands, the calloused knuckles and faint scars from years of stunts and training. He'd always known his life could end suddenly, a bad motorcycle turn, a wrong move on a set. But sitting there beside Arthur with the siren wailing above them, he felt something different, not fear of death, fear of living in a way that was too safe, too controlled, so focused on obligations that he forgot about people bleeding at his feet. "You were going to New York, right?" He asked softly, more to keep Arthur tethered to this world than because he needed the information. "What's in New York?" For a moment there was no response. Then Arthur's lips moved behind the mask, the words leaking out in a weak whisper. "My son," he managed. "Haven't seen him in years." He paused, breathing hard as if each memory weighed something. "Missed his mother's last day, plane delay, never forgave me, he's having a baby. I thought if I'm there this time..." His voice cracked, and a tear slid from the corner of his closed eye, tracing a clean line down his wrinkled cheek. "Can't be late again." The confession landed between them like something sacred. Sandra swallowed, her throat tight. She knew something about broken families, about the way time and pride created distance that felt impossible to cross. Keanu felt that small hospital room from his own past rise up again, the one where too late had become permanent. The idea that this man's whole heart, literally and figuratively, was straining toward one last chance at making things right. It hit them both harder than anything a script ever had. By the time they reached St. Mary's, the sky had shifted, clouds gathering in a heavy gray lid over the city. Orderlies met them at the entrance, the stretcher rolling out in a rush of commands and bright lights. "Family stays in the waiting room," a nurse said automatically, gesturing toward a set of double doors. Keanu almost corrected her, then remembered what he'd told the paramedic at the airport. "Today we are." "We're with him," he said simply. The nurse looked at them, really looked, and saw not the headlines or the movies, but two people who had chosen to be here when they hadn't had to. She nodded, her expression softening. "Then this way." The waiting room was half full, an old TV murmuring in the corner, plastic chairs arranged in uncomfortable rows, the faint smell of sanitizer and burnt coffee. They sat down side by side, neither quite ready to lean back like their bodies were still braced for impact. A muted news broadcast flickered on the screen, suddenly switching to a report from Los Angeles International Airport. A still image appeared, the plane they'd almost boarded surrounded by emergency vehicles. The caption read, "Engine failure FORCESABORTED takeoff, no serious injuries reported." Underneath, in smaller text, sources say 2 major film stars missed the flight while assisting a medical emergency at the gate. Sandra stared at the screen, at the grainy security photo of the gate, where she could just make out the blur of her own hair, Keanu's dark jacket bent over a fallen body. The room seemed to fold in on itself for a second, all the noise and motion of the day funneling into one clear realization. One missed flight, one collapsed stranger, one small decision to stop had drawn a sharp, bright line down the center of their lives. Before, after. She exhaled slowly, turning toward Keanu, who was watching the same images with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and quiet acceptance. Before she could speak, a doctor in green scrubs pushed through the doors, a clipboard in his hand, his eyes scanning the room. "Family of Arthur Hayes," he called. The single word, family, hung in the air as both of them stood at the same time, hearts climbing into their throats, about to hear whether the man who had unknowingly saved them had survived his own brush with the edge. "Over here," Keanu said, stepping forward. The doctor's eyes flicked between them with a brief flicker of surprise, then settled into the calm, neutral gaze of someone used to carrying other people's panic. He motioned them a little aside, giving them a pocket of privacy in the noisy room. "Mr. Hayes had a mild heart attack," the doctor explained. "It wasn't the most severe kind, but with his age and stress levels, it was serious. The good news is you got him here fast. That gave us a real chance to stabilize him. We're prepping him for a procedure to clear a blockage. Barring complications, his odds are good." Sandra felt her knees go weak with relief and had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. "So he's going to make it?" she asked, needing the words stated plainly. "If everything goes as planned, yes," the doctor replied. "He'll need rest, lifestyle changes, follow-up care, but this doesn't have to be the end of his story." Something in the way he said it made it sound bigger than just medical talk, like it applied to more than just Arthur lying in some bright, cold room down the hall. "Do you know why he was coming to New York?" Keanu asked. "He kept talking about his son." The doctor checked the chart. "There's an emergency contact listed, a Daniel Hayes, says son next to it." He looked up again. "We'll need to notify him either way. Families should hear this from us, but sometimes it helps if the first voice they hear isn't a stranger." He hesitated, then gently handed the clipboard over. "If you're really here for him, would one of you like to make the call?" The weight of the request settled into Sandra's hands along with the form. She stared at the number, at the name Daniel Hayes, feeling the full weight of what this conversation could reopen or shatter. She thought about all the times she'd wished someone would bridge a distance for her, make that hard call, push past pride and fear. "I'll do it," she said quietly. Keanu nodded, a silent, steady presence beside her. They walked to a quieter corner, near a vending machine humming in the background, and she dialed the number with slightly shaking fingers. The phone rang for a long time. Just as she thought it might go to voicemail, a man's voice answered, wary. "Yeah," he said, no hello, no warmth. "Hi, is this Daniel?" Sandra asked gently. "Who's this?" The suspicion was sharp, defensive. She glanced at Keanu, then took a breath. There was no easy way to say it. "My name is Sandra," she said. "I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital in Los Angeles. Your father, Arthur, had a medical emergency at the airport. He's here with us now. He's stable, but he had a heart attack." There was a beat of silence, then a rough, disbelieving laugh. "Of course he did," Daniel said bitterly. "Of course he finds some new way to be dramatic. Is this some kind of joke? Did he put you up to this? I told him I wasn't going to play along this time." His words were angry, but beneath the anger Sandra heard it, the tremble of an old wound. She didn't rush to defend Arthur. Instead, she let the man's pain have a little room. "I don't know your history," she replied softly. "I just know I was there when he collapsed. I watched him struggle to breathe. I heard him talk about you and how he missed being there when your mother died and how he couldn't live with missing you again. That didn't sound like drama to me. It sounded like regret and hope." Line went quiet. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was smaller. He said that?" he asked. "He talked about my mom?" Sandra nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yeah," she said, "and about your baby on the way." There was a sharp inhale. That's not public," he muttered. "I just told him last week. I didn't think he was even listening." He paused, and she could almost hear him wrestling with years of hurt, distrust, love he didn't know how to admit. Is he going to die?" "What?" "No," she answered, with more conviction than she'd had just minutes earlier. "The doctors think he has a real chance, but he needs you. And you need to know that whatever he did wrong, today he fought hard not to be late for you again. And so did we." She hesitated, then added, "I know you don't owe him anything, but this might be your last best chance to decide what you'll live with, anger or something else." There was a long, shaky breath on the other end. "I can't just get on a plane," Daniel said. "Work, money, the baby, and he's in LA, I'm in New York. His voice broke off. Keanu, listening, stepped closer to the phone, his tone practical and calm. "We can help with that," he said. We've got resources. If you want to come, we'll get you here. No cameras, no strings, just you and your dad in a room. He hadn't planned to say it, hadn't cleared it with any manager or publicist. But as the words left his mouth, he knew they were right. On the TV across the room, the breaking news segment shifted. A grainy photo of Keanu and Sandra at the airport appeared on the screen, a headline scrolling beneath. SDARS skip fateful flight to help stranger, Hollywood heroes trend worldwide. A nurse turned the volume down, but not before they caught a glimpse of their own faces splashed across a national broadcast, their private moment already being fed into the public machine. Sandra felt a knot form in her stomach. Fame had always been a double-edged sword. Today, it felt sharper than ever. "Why would you do that?" Daniel asked quietly, suspicion fighting with something else, maybe hope, maybe disbelief. Keanu looked at Sandra, then answered simply. "Because someone did it for us today without even knowing," he said. "We just want to pass that on." There was another silence, the kind that feels like the world is tilting one way or another. Finally, Daniel exhaled. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, if you can get me there, I'll come." As Sandra ended the call, her phone buzzed again with a flood of notifications, interview requests, statements to approve, a dozen people trying to turn this day into a story they could package and sell. She let it vibrate unanswered in her hand. The doctor appeared once more at the doorway, eyes searching for them. "We're taking Arthur in now," he said. "This is the hard part. We'll know more in a couple of hours." Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look that held everything: fear, exhaustion, a strange, fierce kind of peace. They demissed their flight, changed a stranger's life, and now they were about to find out if that stranger, in some impossible way, had just changed theirs too. They sat down again in the plastic chairs, side by side, bracing themselves to wait, not as stars, not as headlines, but as two people who had finally slowed down long enough to really be present for someone else, no matter how this next part turned out. The hours stretched out in the way only hospital time can. Long, elastic minutes marked by the drip of IVs, the shuffle of shoes in the corridor, the low murmur of nurses exchanging updates at their station. Outside the waiting room windows, daylight faded into evening, the city lights flickering on one by one like quiet little promises that life was still going on out there, messy and relentless. Inside, Keanu and Sandra talked in fits and starts, their conversation circling back over old projects, shared memories, and then slowly the spaces in between. "I used to think being busy meant I was safe," Sandra admitted at one point, staring at her hands. "Like if I just kept moving, kept working, I wouldn't have to sit with the parts of my life that didn't make sense yet, or the calls I hadn't returned." She thought of her family, of texts from friends she'd left on read because she was too tired to say, "I'm not okay." But today, everything stopped anyway, and it wasn't the end of the world, it was something else. Keanu nodded, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I've spent a long time learning how to be alone and making peace with that," he said. "But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot that being alone isn't the same as accepting that the world doesn't need you, that you can just drift past people in pain and call it respecting their space. Today, for once, I didn't walk past, and I feel more connected, scared, alive, all of it." There was no speech, no tidy lesson. Just two people telling the truth, in a room built for waiting. A few hours later, the doors opened again and the same doctor walked in, his shoulders tired but his eyes clear. Keanu and Sandra stood before he even said a word. "He did well," the doctor said, and they both exhaled in the same instant. "We cleared the blockage. There were a couple of tense moments, but he pulled through. He'll be in recovery for a while. You can see him briefly, one at a time." Relief came not as cheering or dramatic tears, but as a deep, quiet wave that washed over them, softening every muscle that had been clenched since the airport. Sandra went in first. Arthur lay in a dim room, hooked up to monitors, a soft beeping marking his presence more surely than his shallow breaths. His face looked smaller without the strain of pain tightening it. She moved to his bedside and spoke in a gentle murmur. "Hey, Arthur, it's Sandra, the lady from the airport who hijacked your medical drama." His eyes fluttered, open, blurry but searching until they settled on her. Behind the exhaustion, there was a flicker of recognition and confusion. "You missed your plane," he whispered, guilt already forming around the edges of his words. Shook her head, smiling softly. "We missed a flight," she corrected. Not our lives, not something that really mattered. And you should know that flight had engine trouble. It had to turn back. No one was hurt, but if we'd rushed on, we would have been up there, stuck in smoke and chaos while you were down here alone. So if you're feeling guilty, don't. You didn't ruin our day. You saved it. You made it honest. His eyes filled with tears that didn't quite fall. Didn't mean to cause trouble, he breathed. Just didn't want to be late again. You weren't late, she said firmly. You were right on time for a second chance. She paused, then took his hand. We called your son Daniel. He's on his way. We're flying him out here. He wants to see you. For a second, Arthur's whole body seemed to relax, like something heavy he'd been carrying alone for years finally slipped off his shoulders. His lips trembled. You did that, he asked. She nodded, squeezing his hand. We just made a call. You're the one who decided not to give up on him. When Keanu stepped into the room next, he found Arthur still wiping at his eyes with the back of a shaking hand. How's the view from this side? Keanu asked softly, pulling a chair up beside the bed. Arthur gave a weak huff of laughter. Never thought I'd wake up and see you too, he said, voice rough. Thought maybe I'd imagined it all. Keanu smiled, quiet and sincere. We're really here, he replied. And so are you, that's the miracle. He hesitated, then added, you should know the world knows what happened. Cameras, headlines, all of it. They're calling you the man who made us miss our flight. Arthur winced, but Keanu went on before the guilt could root itself. But that's not the story we're going to tell, he said. If anyone asks, we're going to say we were just two people who happened to be around when a brave man decided he wanted to fix something important in his life. The heroes are you, the paramedics, the doctors, the gate agent who froze the whole system for one stranger. We're not taking that away from them. In those words was his own quiet rebellion against a world that turned everything into a headline, a way of choosing humility in the middle of unwanted attention. The next day, Daniel arrived, eyes red from the red-eye flight, from worry, from too many nights spent rehearsing speeches he thought he'd never give. Sandra and Keanu met him in the hallway, gave him a simple rundown, then stepped aside as he walked into his father's room. There were no cameras, no reporters, just two people staring at each other over a lifetime's worth of distance. The first words were clumsy, apologies tangled with anger and love, but they were spoken. That alone felt like a small miracle. In the weeks that followed, both Keanu and Sandra's teams worked overtime to manage the fallout of the story. Interview requests poured in. Brands wanted to attach themselves to the inspirational moment. They both said no again and again, turning down the loud offers and instead agreeing to one joint appearance, not on a late-night couch, but at a small hospital charity event raising money for cardiac care and emergency response training. When they spoke there, they didn't talk much about themselves. They talked about Arthur, about Daniel, about the anonymous faces at the gate who stayed, who handed over their water bottles, who cleared space for the paramedics. We weren't the only ones who helped that day, Sandra told the room. We were just the ones people recognized. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, they sat together at a small cafe, no cameras in sight. Between them on the table lay a printed photograph that had arrived in the mail. Arthur sitting in a worn armchair, thinner but smiling, his arm around a young man who looked like him, only less tired. In the young man's arms, a newborn baby slept, tiny fingers gripping his shirt. On the back of the photo, in shaky handwriting, was a single line. Thank you for helping me not be late this time. They sat with that for a long while, the noise of the cafe fading to a gentle hum around them. The airport, the ambulance, the waiting room, the missed meetings, the flight that almost went wrong, all of it folded into this one simple image of 3 generations squeezed into a single frame. It didn't erase the mistakes or the losses any of them had lived through, but it proved that even on an ordinary morning with a rushed coffee and a boarding pass in hand, you could still choose to show up for someone. You could still decide that kindness mattered more than schedules, that courage sometimes looked like stopping when everything in you said, go. As they finished their drinks and stepped back out into the city, neither of them felt the same pressure to hurry they once had. Their lives were still busy. Scripts still needed reading, calls still needed answering. But somewhere inside, something fundamental had shifted. They demissed a flight and walked straight into a moment that reminded them who they really wanted to be when no one was watching. And if every now and then they found themselves in another crowded terminal, watching people rush past each other without looking up, they carried that day with them like a quiet vow. If someone falls, if someone calls out, if life cracks open unexpectedly at their feet, they would stop. They would kneel. They would stay. Because sometimes the thing you think you're late for is nowhere near as important as the life you're right on time to touch.